Kelly Reichardt is one of my most favorite filmmakers. Her films are remarkably low-key, focusing on small yet stirring human moments sans sentimentality. Hers is not a cinema of stimuli, but a work of calm and piercing observation. She draws you into her narrative slowly but sure-footedly. Reichardt's characters often take uncertain roads in search of new frontiers to escape as well as thrive. But hostile environments and a precarious economy pushes them to tackle conditions of scarcity and emergency. In fact, Reichardt's first 4 movies could be called anti-road movie, since road movie as a genre often propagates the American cultural myth by associating open road with liberation, optimism, and upward mobility. While her characters do possess such aspirations, their journeys are punctuated with stagnation and waiting. Let's delve into one of Reichardt's most accessible films to understand the depth and brilliance of her beautiful minimalism.
A lot of them are about people who are sort of don't have a big net under them and are trying to, especially in Wendy and Lucy, where one wrong decision and you could, you're screwed then. And
Wendy and Lucy tracks the journey of the titular characters, or its lack thereof. Wendy is a young, lower middle class white woman who was drawn by the promise of a job at an Alaskan cannery. She has driven from Indiana with her canine companion, Lucy. Her car breaks down in small town, Oregon, and it sets off a domino effect. Thinking of the budgetary constraints the car repair might impose on her trip, Wendy steals Consequently, she becomes a victim of a smug stock boy's social conditioning.
Rules apply to everyone equally. If a person can't afford dog food, they shouldn't have a dog.
Now, if you think stealing is simply bad decision-making, what would you call the institutional apathy and the performative humanity of its workers?
Sir, my dog is tied up outside.
Relax.
You can pay your fine now, or you can come back in 2 weeks for a trial with the judge. Then you can pay the $50 plus court fees.
Rigid stipulations that deny second chances. When Wendy is in police custody for a few hours, Lucy is lost. The rest of the narrative, Wendy simply waits. She waits for the mechanic to repair her car. She waits for good news from the dog pound. Wendy rings her family for emotional support, but her phone call is reduced into a call for material help, and the conversation naturally fizzles out. She finds human decency in the Walgreens security guard, who shows some concern for her plight. The old man himself represents an aging workforce who can't afford to leave the labor market. Elsewhere, we see the town's elderly and disabled picking cans for pocket change. Wendy does eventually receive news from the car mechanic and the dog pound. By the end, one thing becomes clear. When people with no safety nets fail in their plan, they are not just robbed of their material possessions. They also lose emotional ties, willpower, and hope. Parallels could be drawn between Wendy and Lucy and the neo-realist classic Umberto D. But unlike De Sica's tale of a pensioner and his dog, Reichardt denies us easy emotional attachments with her protagonist. We know very little about Wendy. Her card plate tells us she's from Indiana. She looks vulnerable, although she faces her crisis with a quiet determination. In fact, rather than adding emotional texture, Reichardt pushes us to keenly observe the character's conditions. Wendy follows a set of routine despite the stasis. She cleans herself at a gas station sink, changes her bandage, sits in the coffee shop occupied with her financial ledger, and checks at the dog pound. Reichardt mentions in an interview, "I do love to film a core. I like to film a process and the details of that labor." That naturally reminds us of another great filmmaker who also observed her character through humdrum domestic chores. Wendy's management of time speaks of her aspirations and optimism. Thus, the accidental tragedies that strike her makes it all the more painful to watch. Moreover, this is the first of the 3 fruitful collaborations between Reichardt and Michelle Williams. Reichardt's uncanny ability to tell stories through little details finds its perfection in Michelle, who brings such deep soulfulness to the character. Wendy also fails to make connections that befit a movie narrative. Yet her wariness for strangers isn't simply an issue with her personality. The movie is set in a post-industrial wasteland where there are no work opportunities. Long gone are the cinematic fantasies of small-town solidarity. This is a socially automized community where any transactions with strangers are purely instrumental. And for a lone young woman who has suddenly become a drifter, believing in a sense of community is quite impossible and dangerous too. It's why Wendy initially resists the security guard's help. Owing someone in such a bleak economic situation puts her in a vulnerable position. But there is a feeling of gratitude when Wendy accepts the old man's kindness for what it is. Kelly Reichardt's observations are laced with lyricism as well as sharp irony. She makes her irony evident even in the title, as Wendy and her non-human companion Lucy are mentioned on equal footing. The Neo-Realist classics end on a slight note of hope amongst the sea of despair and gloom. But in Wendy and Lucy, there is only a gnawing sense of irony by the end. The barren jail cell and the intimidating law reduce Wendy's personhood to a record. In contrast, the blankets and the chew toys at the dog pound cell seem to extend dignity to the animals. The social hierarchies are such that dogs evoke pathos, while humans living on the fringes don't. The canine protagonist finds shelter and her future looks hopeful, whereas uncertainty looms over the human counterpart. And when framed through the chain-link fence, we see who is trapped among these two. Wendy is finally on the move. However, the ideology and the structures that reinforce social immobility is ubiquitous.